Hello, I'm Bob Trubshaw. I'd like to talk to you today about some special horizons, and they are associated with ritual sites, sacred places if you like, with the Neolithic, the Iron Age and the Anglo-Saxon period. I first discovered this effect when I took a holiday in Devon in September 2012, so actually very close to 10 years before I'm making this recording. And I was interested in a place called Broadnimot, largely because the place name is sort of a corrupted version of Nemeton, the Latin word for sacred grove. So clearly a Roman sacred grove, but almost certainly an Iron Age sacred grove before that. Broad in this sense means great, although I think pedantically it's not so much the Great Sacred Grove as one of several villages called Nimot, and this was the greatest of them. Sorry if that sounds confusing. But anyway, Broadnimot is its name. The location of the Nemeton has never been established archaeologically, but I sort of looked at the old survey map and realising that many of these Neolithic, Iron Age and the Anglo-Saxon ritual sites are actually on hilltops. I started looking for a conspicuous hill and just drove up there really and parked in a sort of field gateway and had a little wander around. And it struck me that it was fairly level for a hilltop, more like a plateau, and thankfully there weren't many trees. And in the sort of middle distance, a couple of miles away, in each direction, there were hills. And I sort of dubbed this the ringed horizon effect. Now, some of you are going to say, well, if you travel anywhere and there aren't many trees, you're going to see hills in the distance. Well, yes, maybe, but not all the way around you. They may be, in a good part of one distance, but there may be a sort of bit of a hill slope behind you that stops you seeing a distant horizon. And I was standing there at Broadnimot and thinking, well, where's the effect of core blimey? I could be standing right outside my own house and seeing the same effect. Now, a little bit of context is needed here. The place I was living at 10 years ago was actually a house on the bank of one of the biggest Neolithic henges, Avebury in Wiltshire. So, not any old house, not any old location, but pretty central to a massive Neolithic henge, but also in the centre of a much, much larger Neolithic ritual landscape. And as I say, in nearly every direction there was a ridge of hills, sometimes quite dramatic. To the north of the henge is quite close, is the site of Windmill Hill. Now, I'll come back to all this in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. But over the subsequent years, I was looking for other sites of this nature, particular ones that the Anglo-Saxons referred to as harrows. Now, when harrows have been excavated, they've turned out to have Anglo-Saxon ritual activity, but far more Roman and Iron Age ritual activity. So whatever the word harrow really denoted to an Anglo-Saxon, what it was actually referring to was a place of about 100 hectares where ritual activity had been going on for generations, for millennia. Quite how the Anglo-Saxons understood that depth of history, we don't know. Clearly it would be transferred through some sort of myths. This was the place to go to do ritual stuff. But the place names can survive in old documents, can survive quite late. 12th, 14th century field names can contain the word harrow or a corruption of it. And we're not referring to the agricultural implement here, that comes later. But it's not always clear where the specific harrow was, but we know they were almost certainly hilltops, and so I have that sort of inquiring mind that looks at an OS map and says, well, where's the right short of a hill that could have been a harrow, and if I walk towards it, does it look like a harrow, but fairly distinctive sort of hill shape. And then in recent years I walked to the top, or driven to the top. Many of these harrows have a road running across them, which is kind of interesting in its own right. And I park up and have a look around, and I go, well, core blimey, yet another example of a ringed horizon. Here we are on Essex-Suffolk borders, it's a village called Birdbrook, looking for a lost Harrowdon, a Harrow Hill. referred to in place names, but the actual no longer a current place name, hasn't been for centuries. Here we are in the Leicestershire Wolds, close to the village of Burton on the Wolds, and we're looking for the Harrow that continued in use as the name of one of the medieval great fields. They dropped the H because, well, you would, wouldn't you? So it was the Arrow Field. And again, okay, it's not a completely ringed horizon, but there's special pleading there, which I will come to when we discuss this in more detail. And in the south of Leicestershire, a little village of Bringhurst, church on a mound, pretty much in the middle of the settlement. Even quite unspeculative archaeologists have said this looks like a pre-conversion ritual site which has acquired a church. And whilst the surrounding houses make it difficult to see clearly, it is another example of one of these ringed horizons. What's quite interesting about all these places I'm describing is you only have to walk about half a mile, sometimes less, and that ringed horizon effect ceases to exist. It is a very place-specific phenomena. So let's just go back to Avebury again. This is the photograph I showed you before. We're standing at the northern part of a double stone road called the West Kennet Avenue, and we're looking across the Henge and the outer stone circle and the remains of the two inner stone circles. In the far distance, the skyline is made up of Windmill Hill, which predates the Henge and the stone circles and so forth. It was Causeways Enclosure Camp, so it's the original place of meeting for the Avebury area. So, first of all, I'm going to ask, why were prehistoric people particularly interested in the horizon? We're not usually that interested in the horizon. Archaeologists look down at the ground, and when they present their results, their sort of plans and maps, it's that sort of God-eye view looking down. Horizon rarely features in academic archaeological studies. Astronomers look at the sky. They're sort of mix of the two. The archaeoastronomers, of course, are interested in where the stars and the sun and the moon are rising on the horizon. And that seems to be exactly what the Neolithic people and other older people as well, ancient Egyptians, the Babylonians, and famously were interested in astronomy. And poetically, you can say it's where the earth kisses the sky. And if you have a sense of the earth being some sort of deity, and if you have a sense of the sky and being a deity, or more than one deity, or thunder gods and so forth, then it's perhaps a rather romantic notion that the earth god and the sky god are sort of kissing at the horizon. Frankly, if you're an ancient Egyptian, it's not such a euphemism really. Here's the sky goddess Nut and the earth god Geb. I won't explain anymore. I think this is, let's say they're not exactly kissing, are they? But kissing is a useful euphemism. What other sort of effects in the landscape, other than standing in the middle of the Henge or whatever, a Nemeton or a Harrow, what other occasions are we interested in the skyline, the horizon? Well, I'm now standing about halfway down the double stone road, the West Kennet Avenue, towards the end of the part that was re-erected in the 1930s. It continues beyond the stones that you can see here. But turn your eye up to the skyline, and you can see clumps of beech trees. And under each of those clumps of beech trees are one or more Bronze Age barrows, burial mounds. And they appear to be on the skyline, seen from the avenue, basically. And when you actually walk up to them, they are about 100 yards, 100 metres or whatever, short of the actual ridge. And that skyline is not just any old ridge, it is the Ridgeway running from Oxfordshire, past several Iron Age hill forts, and going down into the Kennet Valley, which is the dip towards the right of this photograph, and then continuing on to the distant skyline, the massive chalk ridge above the Vale of Bewsey. Now, there's something quite interesting if you walk along the avenue, so from right to left in this photograph. Let's look at a map for a moment. This shows what survives of the avenue. So the henge and the stone circles are in the top left of this map. The Kennet Valley is at the bottom, and you can see the double stone row running roughly south from the henge. But and it continued all the way down to the River Kennet, so about at least twice the length that it's been reconstructed. Now, if you walk along that avenue from the Kennet going towards the henge and the stone circles, you can't see the henge. This is what you can see: a hill slope. It's not as if it's a diddly squat little henge and diddly squat little stone circle. It's the biggest surviving examples. It's difficult to miss it when you do get to see it, but intentionally this processional way, which is how we have to see this double stone row, is lined up, so you have to get almost to the end of the avenue. Here we are. And there were actually just about half a dozen stones each side closer to the henge. They've mostly been demolished, broken up. But you're pretty much at the end, and suddenly the henge leaps into view. Now, just take a little note of that clump of trees by the henge. They're beech trees again, and they mark the southern entrance. So, jump forward. Here we are, standing on the hedge bank of the southern entrance, looking back towards the southern entrance, the same clump of beech trees. And you can see that it's a very substantial bank that stops you seeing into the henge until you've walked through one of the four formal entrances, and then you can see the outer circle to the left of this photograph. So jump back. We're now standing just inside the south entrance. The beech trees are just behind us, and we're looking at the two stones which form part of the outer circle. And they're the two biggest stones of the outer circle, and they always were. The ones that are sort of missing and so forth, we know to have been smaller. They more or less block the view. And then beyond that are three stones of the south circle. Again, the biggest examples of the south circle. So it's like they're doing their best to stop you seeing what's going on beyond the outer circle, beyond the south circle. And when we walk forward through this image and walk into the south circle, there is yet another arrangement of stones in a D shape, which had a massive standing stone at its almost its centre. It's been nicknamed the obelisk stone. Sadly, that got broken up, but this rather ugly concrete marker, pyramid-shaped concrete marker, is the site of it. But clearly, the focal point of the Avebury stone circles, but like a nested situation, and the obelisk having the D arrangement, then the south circle, then the outer circle, then the henge bank. And we see pretty much the same thing going on at Stonehenge. No, there isn't a big earthen bank, and never was, but we've got this massive arrangement of trilithons, which still, when you look for them in the direction where they're mostly surviving, blocks the view. There's looking at a plan of Stonehenge as it was meant to be. And so the outer ring of trilithons pretty much effectively block seeing the inner horseshoe, the bluestone horseshoe, and within that there is the recumbent stone, so-called altar stone. So not only can't you see in, but you can't hear from the outside what's going on, yet within the inside you would have got some rather dramatic acoustic effects, just as you can get within medieval churches and cathedrals. This is what Stonehenge looks like since the work in the 1950s. Some of the stones are standing, shown in the darker brown. Quite a few are now recumbent, shown in the lighter brown. Now, again, there is one little anomaly to do with the horizon at Stonehenge. Not many people know about this. It isn't sort of part of the visitor's interpretation panel scenario. Here we are looking due south. This is Stonehenge. Well, what's so special about this place? Well, let's do it from a map. Stonehenge towards the bottom of this image, and running east to west is this double ditch earthwork, known slightly misleadingly as the cursus, but that's what it's called, so we'll call it the cursus. And if you find roughly the midpoint of the cursors, which just happens to be effectively due north of Stonehenge. And you just start walking roughly due south, then obviously Stonehenge is getting bigger on the skyline, as you would reasonably expect. But as you get to within about 100-200 yards of Stonehenge, it disappears. The horizon swallows it. You've walked down into a shallow dip of about 8 or 10 feet. And then as you get really close to Stonehenge, just literally a few hundred yards away, it pops back up on the skyline. Now, this is the only place where you can be close to Stonehenge and see the stones sitting on the skyline. Numerous photographs have been taken with telephoto lenses from a greater distance, and yes, you can create that effect. But this is the one place where the effect happens, if you like, with the naked eye. There are several other henges in the northern Britain which have a similar little trick of the landscape, which also conceals the henge. Sadly, most of these are just old crop marks or little more, so not easy to photograph. But yeah, little dips in the landscape that are exploited for what seems to be a deliberate processional approach. Very reminiscent of the effect that we get with the double stone row, making use of a slightly hillier landscape at Avebury compared to Salisbury Plain. So here's the photograph I've shown you several times now, looking roughly north towards the Henge and Windmill Hill. Then standing in almost exactly the same place, but just 180 degrees the other way, we can see the midwinter sunrise. And because I lived in that henge for 6 winters, I made my best attempts to get photographs of the midwinter sunrise coming up the avenue. And frankly, it was one year's attempt, not very exciting. This was another year's attempt, possibly even less exciting. So there I was, close to the henge. Didn't really have a good photo of the sunrise because the sun is lost in the distant cloud banks, somewhere over Reading and so on, probably always was. And I wandered back into the henge, stood near the south entrance, you can recognise these beech trees again, and waited for the sun to rise. And that's not as daft as it sounds. Because the avenue is at the top of a hill, the sun rises earlier than it does at the bottom of the hill, but between me and the sun is this very substantial earth bank, the Neolithic henge. And would you believe that this photograph was taken 20 minutes later than the photograph of the sunrise at the West Kennet Avenue that you saw previously? And I'm not making that up because my digital camera tells me exactly to the second when I take a photograph. It surprised me. I would have said it was about 10 minutes. And unlike the earlier sunrise that morning, which was lost in the cloud bank, this sunrise from within the henge bank just hits you in the eyes. It's painful to look at, and I wear these photoreactive glasses and so forth permanently, not just as sunglasses, and it's still pretty painful. It's dramatic, it's theatrical. If you were doing a sunrise ritual in the Neolithic period, you would not do it on top of the hill near the West Kennet Avenue. You might have some lookouts up there to say, here, the sun's coming, in a few minutes, it'll come to you as well. That may be part of the theatre, but you would do it inside the henge when the sun really just blasts you. And turning around, it's equally dramatic. There's my shadow striding before me. The shadows of various stones from the outer circle striding even further. Very crisp. And again, the grass, whatever the vegetation might have been in the Neolithic period, it wouldn't have been this particular species of grass, but, you get something quite dramatic. And as you might imagine, I didn't take any video at the time, sadly, but, if you wanted to move, walk through, dance and so forth, then your shadow would be very much alive. And again, we look at these long shadows of the megaliths, and if there's something slightly phallic about a standing stone, then, oh boy, isn't there something phallic about these shadows? So what else can you see at dawn at Avebury? Well, these are not taken at midwinter, they're taken at various times during the year. And what's just wandering around at just after sunrise, you start to see all sorts of faces appearing in the stones, these simulacra. They're not carved, the stone really is almost uncarvable, they are natural features, but deliberately set up so that you see the face at dawn. Particularly, there are a few simulacra that appear at other times of day, and a few just at sunset, but most of them appear at dawn. And when you look at these stones later in the day or a different time of year when the sun is rising at a different angle, it's very hard to make out the simulacra. And if you're just a visitor that turned up middle of the day, spent an hour or two wandering around, you would say, no, he's made up the idea that these look like faces. They're not convincing. But it actually is quite spooky when you first wander around Avebury at dawn, and you turn around again and there's just another face looking at you from one of these stones. The stones really do seem to be alive. Very magical place to be at dawn, to a lesser extent at sunset, but it's definitely a henge that was meant to be experienced very early in the day. Now, my experience of thinking that the faces in the stones make them alive is sort of matched by the work of Professor Mike Parker Pearson at the University of Sheffield. And he spent a number of years investigating Stonehenge and also Durrington Walls nearby. And he came to the conclusion that Stonehenge was a place of the dead. Now, I respect Mike greatly, but I would actually say he's got his terminology wrong. Stonehenge is alive, but it's alive with other than human persons. It was alive with the spirits of the dead and possibly the spirits of those about to be reborn. We just don't understand Neolithic religion, Neolithic worldviews. If it's true for Stonehenge, then Avebury has to be a place of the dead as well, or alive with other than human persons. Let's just go into a little bit more detail about some of these sites. This is still the Avebury area. We're standing on Waden Hill, which runs parallel to the West Kennet Avenue, the Double Stone Row, and we're looking at this man-made hill, the biggest prehistoric man-made mound in Europe, called Silbury Hill, and beyond is the hill ridge with the one stike at the top, and the one stike is an Anglo-Saxon defensive earthwork. Beyond that horizon, the escarpment just drops very, very steeply into the Vale of Pusey. This is a plan view of Silbury Hill and the associated moat, which is silted up, but in times of flood still contains water. We'll note right at the sort of middle, the moat, it doesn't form a complete circle. That's original. There is actually a little causeway here, shown in red, which would always have allowed access to the hill in the middle. What's interesting about this causeway? Well, not that it's there, that's one thing, but if you stand at the western end of the moat, it's actually where the visitors' car park is today, which is all rather handy. And you turn up and stand at that little car park for the full moonrise in August. And as long as the clouds allow you, this is what you will see. The moon rising from that little causeway and going up in the sky. Now, this phenomenon was first picked up by an author called Michael Dames, who constructed the idea that Silbury Hill was rather like a pregnant goddess. Now is not the place to debate whether that idea is really appropriate or not, but let's just regard Silbury Hill as a place of massive mythic significance, and I don't think that this moonrise in August is anything accidental. I think somebody was interested in that horizon effect. We still have an interest in stars rising from the horizon. It got fossilised into astrology, and because of sort of shifts in calendar, the astrological stars, the constellations in the sky, no longer rise in sync with the astrological months and so forth, but in essence it is a horizon effect, And to remember the complexities of it, a number of myths were created about each of the deities or whatever the creatures that are apparently personified in the constellations of the stars. Either say much time has gone on since these ideas were first mooted or first recorded by the ancient Greeks. They probably come out of Babylonian studies that haven't really come down to us and so forth. Much has got mangled, but this is the vestiges of a very rich mythic lore to do with stars and star rises, and to a lesser extent the setting of stars. It's not only Greek and classical culture which was interested in constellations and considered that the horizon effect, the stars rising in different directions. Other traditional cultures had similar interests, similar ways of thinking about the constellations and the cosmos. Here we're looking at the decorations on the skin of a Siberian shaman's drum. Now, apart from being used as a drum to assist with the spirit journeys and so forth, this decoration was also used as part of a divination technique. I understand that small objects, I don't know whether they were knuckle bones of animals or stones or whatever, but small objects were placed on the skin of the drum. A certain amount of drumming then went on, and the position of these small objects in relation to the symbols on the drum was used as a divination technique. Sorry, I don't know the finer details, but I think you can work that one out for yourself. Let's just come back to horizons again, a Neolithic interest in horizons. We've gone up to Cumbria here. We're standing at the very impressive Castle Rig stone circle, horizon typically being lost in cloud here. But when you've got a fairly good view of it, then what you can see, and this was first recognised by John Glover, is that quite a few of the stones in Castle Rig actually mimic the horizon, the slope and so forth. It's as if whoever constructed the stone circle is telling you where you should stand within the circle so that it's the right place, and they do it with all these subtle slopes on the tops and sides of stones, which obviously only line up from the correct place. John's work was taken up by a lady called Helen Woodley, who recognised a number of other such horizon-matching events at stone circles. I'm not going to go into great detail because, well, all I'm trying to say is that the Neolithic people seem to have had an interest in horizons, especially when erecting stone circles. So, let's just start to try and understand these ringed horizons a little better. What we're looking at is a computer-generated map of the Avebury area where the contours have been coloured in automatically. So they go from the bluish colours, which are the lowest levels associated in this case with the Severn Valley, up to through red to white, which are the peaks. There are basically towards the right part of this image, they are Marlborough Downs, and then this linear collection of peaks are going across the bottom, which is this escarpment above the Vale of Pewsey. Shown the position of Avebury, and here's the same map, but with my estimations of where the skyline is visible from the henge. So it isn't actually a continuously ringed horizon, but apart from the northwest, where the close proximity of Windmill Hill blocks much of the view, you're looking at overlapping hill ridges, which give an approximation to a continuous horizon. Of course, it's very difficult to work out how far away particular hills are. As long as they can be seen, they form the horizon. Here we are, standing more or less on the top of Wading Hill, looking across the West Kennet Avenue towards those beech tree clumps on the Ridgeway, and you can see just beyond there that actually from this viewpoint the Ridgeway isn't the ultimate horizon. There's actually the Marlborough Downs in the further distance. If we just change location a bit and look across towards the north, So the henges and the village are within that bunch of trees. Not all the henges within this shot. And then, yes, the northwestern skyline. It's relatively small hill, Windmill Hill, with the causewayed enclosures, but it blocks the skyline in that direction. Here we are, the shot I showed you before, looking roughly south from Weydon Hill, and you looking across Silbury, as I say, to the Wansteig and the ridge to the south. Only in one place in the henge can you see that southern skyline. You can just see Silbury Hill as well, top of Silbury Hill, and that is the centre of the North Circle. It's surprising that you can't see this ringed horizon from anywhere except that one place. As soon as you move just a few yards in any direction, the top of Silbury Hill and the distant Wansteig disappear behind Weydon Hill or more other things. And that's not to do with modern buildings, that's sort of taking all that out of the equation. Here we are. I showed you this example at Broadnymit in Devon, the one that sort of almost triggered my awareness of this. Initially, if you look on a bigger area, you say, well, where is the horizon, Bob? So let's just sort of come in a bit closer. Aha, now we have some indication of where the hills are. And you can see immediately that it's not a circle, but it does form a fairly consistent ring. And where there are a few gaps, there's actually hills just a little further away which close the gap, basically. When you're standing at this sort of plateau-like hilltop at Broadnymit, you aren't really aware of how far away the different parts of the horizon are. You're just aware that the horizon is effectively continuous. Quite interestingly, it's not an equal distance. The hills to the east are further away than the ones to the north and the west. Here we are at the other example I used of the Lost Harrow at Birdbrook on the Essex-Suffolk border. Plenty of hills going on here. It's a nice rolling bit of countryside, and you've got the river valley to the immediate north, Harrowden, the putative site of the Harrowden. And here again, I construct an approximation of which hills give the impression of a continuous ringed horizon. As soon as you come off the top of that hill, then that ringed horizon effect ceases to exist, largely because the Harrowden Hill itself is in the way. It only exists for a distance of a few hundred yards each way at the top of the Harrowden. And here we are looking at the site of the Harrow that gave its name to the medieval Great Field to the east of Burton-on-the-Wolds, although the Great Field was actually in Wymswell Parish to the north. Quite a different scenario here. The Charnwood Hills to the southwest, the other side of the Soar Valley, are definitely prominent and no way about it. And I'm going to have some special pleading here, because to the east and northeast, it's not a classic ringed horizon effect. The ground is still rising up about another 10-20 metres, but it's rising up to somewhere very specific. It's rising up to the location of somewhere called Vernemeton. So another the Nemetons, but the word ver here means great in Latin. But so this really is the great or special sacred grove. And I think this Harrow site, named by the Anglo-Saxons, but presumably in use previously, in the Iron Age at least, was a sort of a shrine or a sacred place on the approach to this central zone. So I think you could get away and say, actually, to the northeast, you may not have a dramatic horizon, but what was located to the northeast had such a rich religious, mythical significance that, oh boy, were you aware of what was just over there, what you were presumably walking towards. Now, this is a surprising one. It's based on crop mark evidence and some field walking done by amateurs in the early 1970s. The amateurs were actually sixth form schoolboys. They did a cracking job. I've read the report. In fact, I met one of the people who organised that activity. So we know there was a lot of Neolithic activity. We also know that an Anglo-Saxon moot site, the meeting place, was effectively in the same place within a few hundred yards, and until somewhere in the mid-20th century there was even a markstone in the middle of the field, which we have to assume was the marker for the Anglo-Saxon moot site. One of the crop marks fairly clearly shows a Neolithic long barrow. Rather unusually, it's not on a skyline, it's sort of set lower down in the landscape. I drove there. I was actually living just a mile or so to the northwest at the time. I had a very brief residence, and I parked up to have a look at the site of this long barrow and see how it sitted in the landscape. I carried on sort of walking to slightly higher ground, thinking, well, perhaps there were more burial mounds or something nearby, and just sort of getting a feel for the land. And suddenly, oh my goodness, 200 or 300 yards from that crop mark for the chamber tomb, long barrow, there was a ringed horizon. Now, it is fairly hilly, rolling country. There's a big ridge to the northwest of here, and I was living on the crest of that ridge at Barrowby, but I was not expecting a ringed horizon effect. And it's slightly messy when you look at what hill ridges actually make, but some of these are quite dramatic. Why? Well, I think it's all about this sense of theatre, that you get these dramatic sunrises once you can delay the sunrise 10, 15, 20 minutes so that the sun reappears over a raised horizon, and it's far clearer than it being lost in the cloud bank. And we still retain that interest in theatre. This is taken inside a small chapel in Lincolnshire. Medieval churches, without exception, are orientated to the east. The actual word orientate means it's the Orient, it's the east. Its meaning of that word is buried in its etymology. And eastern windows in chancels and so forth, this is just a little single cell church with nave come chancel. You get this dramatic sunrise effect, often enhanced by stained glass. Well, yes, there's continuity there because churches sometimes, perhaps not as often as we would like to think, occupy the sites of earlier pre-conversion ritual sites.